how we learn languages. Let's talk about it. Okay, so here are the different types of ways that I've heard people learn languages. Number one, we all did it, formal language instruction. So going to a classroom. Language immersion, I'm doing it. I came to Korea with the hope of learning Korean. Language exchanges, meeting people from other cultures and trying to, teach each other. So in my case, it would be great if I met Korean on a weekly basis and we just exchanged cultures, languages. They speak to me in Korean, I speak in English. All of that. Self-study, buy a lot of books, go and study at home. Content-based language learning, it's a newer form of learning a language, which is mostly based on kind of picking up different content, such as movies, songs, things that you're interested in, and learning that way. This is a pretty popular method, and it works if you are committed. Do you have any other ideas? These are the ones that I mostly am aware of, but how have you learned the language? Is it any different to the ones I've stated here? It'd be interesting to know. So, one thing to remember, so there's different ways that people learn languages. I think one thing that is really important if you want to get good at the language that you're learning, and if you want to take it beyond like basic, starter, and going into more intermediate and proficient, you have to remember these things. Number one, that it's difficult to learn a second language. Let's all acknowledge that, because I think for many years, I walked around thinking, yeah, it's going to be easy to learn languages. I know several other languages. How hard can Korean be? It is very difficult. So things that you need to remember is that you need to make a conscious effort when you're learning a language. So it means you have to actually do something. Just sitting there passively watching a movie, hoping that, words are just going to form into your head and stick in your mind. It sometimes does happen, but I don't think it's the most effective way. You may have to unlearn habits from your mother tongue, especially when it comes to pronunciation. Like in Korea, so many people still mix up F and P, B and V, I think it's mostly older generation, but sometimes younger people too. And those can create really embarrassing situations, and it can create miscommunication, which again, if somebody is like, huh, what did you say? Doesn't really make you feel confident at all. It takes persistence, dedication, and a combination of what has been said up here to help you become proficient. So it's a lot of hard work, and it's not easy. And neither is it easy for the teacher. So today I'm going to focus on the teacher. What can you do to help your students learn English? Let's take a look. So the first thing I want to mention is the input hypothesis. So this is made famous by Stephen Krashen. And basically, it's like saying that to get really good at a language, it's best to listen to or read things that are a little bit challenging, but still mostly understandable. So you as the teacher will find material that is mostly understandable with a little bit of challenging words, maybe a new grammar form. That's just one new grammar form, not 5 new styles of grammar, 10,000 new vocabulary. But you give your students, let's say, a piece of reading, they can mostly read it. There's a few new words and maybe one type of grammar that they haven't come across yet. So he really focuses on the type of material that you will give to your students. So according to this theory, learners can acquire language naturally and effortlessly, which is super great, when they are exposed to language input. That's those materials that is appropriate for their level, for their proficiency or level of proficiency. And so the role of the teacher or parent or caregiver is to provide this input in a way that is interesting and engaging for all learners. And to be honest with you, the only way that you can do that is if you get to know your students. So when you first meet your students, it's really important that you spend time getting to know them. Do diagnostic assessments so that you know which levels they are at, so you have an idea of your students' level of proficiency, but also talk to them so that you find out what they're interested in, because hopefully as you give them materials more related to their interests, it boosts their engagement, hopefully. Doesn't always work, but you can always try. With the input hypothesis, learning happens when your students hear or read language that is mostly at their level with just a little bit of difficulty. They should mostly understand it. And it has to have some new things for them to be able to kind of grasp on and hold on to. It's all about learning from what we hear and what we see, mainly from what we read. But it can come in any forms. So it can be words spoken by people that you're listening to in their conversations. It can be things that are written, signboards are language input, books, magazines, Instagram can be the language input, TikTok can be the language input, and the teacher can also be the language input. So your students are going to constantly learn from loads of different places, loads of different platforms. So you can be a bit versatile and you can focus in on what your students like. Again, a big thing about these materials, this language input that you as a teacher will choose, it has to be understood by the students, mostly understood by the students, but include a couple of new things. A really important thing is to have a balance. So you don't want to give your students very easy things to read and listen to, because then they won't improve, they'll just stay at the same level, which is why I advise teachers, don't just rely on your school textbook, because sometimes I find that the textbook that we use, especially here in Korea, the language is far too easy for the students, for where they are at. Because a lot of the students that I have, they go to hagwons and they have really good knowledge of vocabulary, and some of the sentences in the textbook are way too easy for them. So it's really good for you to assess and know your students' levels and be careful, not just to give them really easy stuff. On the other hand, you also don't want to give them very difficult stuff, because then they will be overwhelmed and they wouldn't want to learn anymore. So have a good balance. Think about the quality of the material, the amount as well. That would be helpful. Again, good teaching or good language teaching means giving learners input that matches their skill level and is interesting. And as teachers, you will help your students by providing understandable input with context, visuals, and explanations. So really, as a teacher, choosing the right material for your students is going to be really key in order for them to be successful when it comes to the language input. Now I have some examples of how we can do this in the classroom. How can we incorporate the input hypothesis into our classroom? Well, you can provide your students understandable listening and reading activities that is at their level with just a little bit of difficulty. Storytelling is also a good way. You can tell them stories. Again, you can pre-teach vocabulary, let them know what different words means and sentences mean, explain the grammar. You can do picture description, give them a picture, describe it to them, or, describe the picture and then let them draw, from what they hear. You can do role playing, give them a script that you've already written out, that you've, taught the vocabulary, you've gone over, you've read it a couple of times, and then you just allow them to do it by themselves. Songs and chants, very good for long-term memory, very good for exposing your students to vocabulary and improving their pronunciation. So these are some of the ways that you can incorporate the input hypothesis into your class. Now, according to Stephen Krashen, you can just do that. Just do these things, input lots of things into your students at the right level, which is understandable, and your students will learn and become really proficient at the language. However, my only thing with this hypothesis, if you only ever give your students input, is that your students will get really good at doing tests, because they can spot wrong from right very easily, because you've trained them that way. And they will be really good at grammar, because hopefully you've been teaching that grammar, showing them what good grammar looks like. You've been focusing in on inputting rules and structures and practicing that. But very often when people only ever focus on input in the classroom, the students don't then know how to express themselves, how to share opinions. and they're slightly afraid of making mistakes. And sometimes they can't have impromptu conversations because you've never really allowed for that to happen. So what can you do? You can focus on the output hypothesis. So this is another hypothesis that can just work on its own, stand on its own. In the output hypothesis, this is a theory in language learning that suggests you can learn a new language better by actively using it in speaking and writing rather than just passively listening or reading. It emphasizes the importance of practicing and producing the language to become fluent and proficient. In simple terms, it's about speaking and writing the new language to get really good at it, rather than just listening and reading. And if you follow this method alone, it means that from the get-go, don't wait until you've had enough input inside of you. Literally from the get-go, as you start to learn the language, you just try to write and you try to speak, and you're going to make all types of mistakes, but it's like learning a bike, basically. You can't learn to ride a bike by watching somebody. You literally have to get on yourself, pedal, and figure out the whole balancing thing in order for you to learn a bike. I can watch people riding a bike until the cows come home. I'll never learn until I get on it. So this is the output hypothesis. It's all about being practical with language. And again, this is good. This is really, really good. I think, do I have some examples? Okay, here is some examples of what I have. Conversations, you can do conversations in your classes or with a partner or by yourself. Talking to yourself with a phone can be great. Writing activities, again, role playing, but this time, rather than giving your students a script, get them to write their own script. Pronunciation practice, get them to speak out loud, try different things. Storytelling, get them to tell the story or write a personalized story as well. All these things are good, but the main problem with this way of learning a language is that you're prone to making a lot of mistakes because your focus is solely on production and you minimize input. And so, suggestion is, how about you do a mix of both? I think you can integrate both input and output hypothesis by using a variety of teaching strategies. And I think the benefit of it is that with the input hypothesis, your students can speak accurately and correctly, and they will become good at taking tests. Let's all face it, we don't like it, but the whole purpose and goal for our students to get better at English is to make sure that they can pass those tests. However, by adding elements of the output hypothesis, you can help your students to become better with impromptu conversations, and it improves their confidence. Because the number of people I have met who lack confidence because of pronunciation is just unbelievable. Like, so many people have been impacted by their pronunciation and they would not speak for fear of making a mistake. So we can tackle that with this theory. And also it helps them to be able to share ideas, to make the language personal. And I love that. So how can we do that? What are some practical ways? So here you can have conversations. The input aspect would be you as the teacher model the language and you give your students feedback. The output is that the students practice what they are learning in class, share ideas, and especially they personalize things. They personalize what they're experiencing. So if you talk about sports, rather than just repeating sentences that are written in the book, such as I play badminton, I love basketball, but you start to ask the students, what sports do you like? Why do you like those sports? So you go away from just repeating phrases and looking at what is correct to how does this apply to your personal life. Next up, storytelling, story writing. So input, the teacher can tell stories that are interesting and engaging, making sure that they choose the story that are at the correct levels. Output, the learners can be encouraged to retell the story in their own words or write their own stories using the words that they've learned. So you see, the same idea, but you can have input and you can have output working together. Listening and speaking activities. So the input can be the teacher can use audio recordings, videos, other listening activities to provide input. And you can do fill in the gaps, you can do true or false, you can do any type of activities which test their accuracy and their ability to remember. But then the output here, you can have, after the students have listened, after the learners have listened to the material, they can be asked to summarize what they've heard, answer questions about what they've heard, engage in a discussion related to the content that they've been listening to. What's really important about input and output, I think, input tests, kind of the lower level skills. Output challenges the students more. And I think having both of them in your class on a regular basis can really give a good balance to the student and help the student to be balanced. Grammar and vocabulary drills. So drills can help learners practice practice the language using grammar, structures, and vocabulary in a controlled way. So here, the teacher can provide input through explicit explanations and examples, and then provide learners with opportunities to practice using the language in a structured and deliberate way, which they need when they first encounter new grammar or new words. They need time to practice using them in set sentences that the teacher chooses. However, once they're now comfortable, you can now go beyond that. Here, you can contextualize the drills. So instead of just doing isolated drills, you can embed the drills or put them into meaningful context. So this is where it's important to know what your students like. So you can find, like a movie clip or an article or a picture or whatever your that, kind of helps your students to be interested in. And you can kind of pair the grammar or the vocabulary with what they're interested in. So students need to see the practical use of this. And I think the best way to do that is to link it to their interest. And then you can have interactive practices as well. Exercises where they apply grammar and vocabulary in conversations or real life scenarios. Again, getting them to link it back to their personal life. Okay, reading and writing activities. I'm not going to read it because I don't want this video to be too long, but you can take the time to read it again. So always the teacher chooses the material that is at the right level of proficiency. So it's mostly understandable with a little bit of difficulty. And then the output is that the teacher finds ways for the students to then take what is in the book and apply it to real life scenarios or personalize it. Take it from just practicing, repeating to now let's make something with it. Let's produce something with it. I conclude with this. By combining both input and output based activities, teachers can create a well-rounded language learning experience that meets the needs of all learners. The key is to provide learners with comprehensible input that is slightly above their current level of proficiency, and then provide them with opportunities to use the language in a meaningful and engaging way. Teachers can also provide feedback and corrections to promote accuracy and fluency. In future lessons, we can talk about error correction and when there's an appropriate time and there's an inappropriate time, so we can look at those things as well. But in a nutshell, that is how we learn languages and my suggestions for how you should go about teaching English in your classroom. Thank you very much. Goodbye.